Hi everyone and welcome to Asami Rat Care. So this video is not currently filmed on a stand because my videoing stand is currently filming potential litters going on here. In fact, there is one litter here. I will very briefly introduce you since I'm up and Mum's currently having fun with her others. Might not be all of them. Let's just grab a little one. So I would like to introduce you to the lumens. So if you remember my breeding series video, and the little topaz Dumbo, who I tended to call Mini Diddy, she is the mum to this little chap. So he's a little topaz. There is topaz and buff in the litter. I wonder if I can get a buff actually. 5 little babies. This is entirely off what video I intended to do. No, here's another topaz. Very sweet little things. She's built her nest in an awkward way, so I can't see inside it. I just have to kind of reach. Here is a little buff. So buff is a slightly paler version of topaz. It's kind of duller. I'll do something on genetics at some point because it's quite an interesting one. This one's a little Dumbo. But yes, they're my little sweethearts. So they're doing very well at the moment, but my camera stand is also in use doing the filming side of things. Let's cover them back up. Right, so this video, what I wanted to do, and it'll be filmed over a couple of days because it'll take me a couple of days to sort stuff out, is a continuation in my substrate videos. And this one is about a bit of a different substrate, and it's a substrate I use for my girls and my main cage. You've probably seen it in some other videos. So let us have a kneel down by the cage and open up and show you. Right, so this substrate is soil, basically. So what we've got going on is Coco fibre soil, and I'll look on that side as well. Everybody's going to escape shortly. I'll give you a bit of a better idea. But you can see in here, we've got basically quite a deep layer of soil. This goes all the way down to the floor here. They've created various tunnels. You can just see a bit of a cave hiding out there. There's like a little bench under there that they've hollowed out. I doubt it'll show up particularly well because it's quite dark in the cage. But there are various tunnels and kind of foraging places. They very much enjoy digging from it. So Coco fibre as a substrate, it is not a normal substrate, which is why it's going to take a little bit longer for me to explain how to deal with things. Oh no, we have an escape. It's Chocobo, needless to say. Oh no, no Mog. No everybody. Right, let's rush and get everybody in. No, I can see you, Tato. Oh, you can come out. You can go back to your babies. Right. Charge. Yeah, so the reason this needs a little bit more explanation is with most substrates, it's all about how absorbent they are, how they kind of absorb in. They're usually dry and they absorb away the moisture, and that is how they keep the smells down. Now, a soil-based substrate is quite different. So instead of it all being about absorbing the moisture away, instead you're looking at keeping it damp to a degree, and then in keeping it damp, it still does a certain amount of absorption, but you use natural processes to break down the waste, and it's something which is called bioactive when it runs really well. So it's quite different than conventional stuff. So I'm not looking at just kind of taking the smells, locking it away until I'm ready to clean them out. Then I chuck it out, chuck it in the bin. Soil, and that soil has been running since August, and it's currently November, nearly December, and I suspect it's not got a smell to it yet, and it won't do for a while. But it takes a lot of care, and when I say a lot of care, I don't have to clean it out. Instead, I dig it through sometimes when the rats don't. Actually, they're doing a very good job at the moment. I keep it watered, so this is quite different. Normally you're trying to keep a normal substrate dry. In this case, you're not. You're trying to keep it damp enough that it kind of sticks together and forms kind of tunnels well, but not so damp it becomes mud, because that would just be horrible. And also, what I also do to it is I add what we call cleanup crew. So if you have a quick look under here, these are a series of earthworms. Nothing fancy. I will say I don't get them from the wild. I order them from reptile places where they've been bred specifically, so they're not kind of full of parasites and such like wild ones. We also have and you're probably not going to be able to see these, but I shall show you. Springtails, so you see those little white dots that are moving? They're springtails. These are both creatures that will go through soil, find kind of waste products, eat them. Springtails are particularly good at finding mould and that kind of thing. Earthworms help kind of aerate the soil and move it around. The problem with the earthworms is they're perfect rat snack size, so they will not last long. Springtails, however, are too small for rats to catch and eat. Both of these are very useful in keeping my soil cleaned. However, when I talked about bioactive setups earlier, this comes very much from reptile keeping, and actually has expanded to other exotics and even some mammals. One of the big challenges with bioactive setups is trying to keep your CUC. Apparently CUK is a bad word in Swedish. I have a very, very good Swedish friend that told me that one. But CUC, cleanup crew, a bioactive setup needs them to be kind of really established, thriving groups. It's something you struggle at in a rat cage, and that is because rats like to hunt and eat insects, hence why the earthworms are putting down again, and I'll put in a few and let them kind of hopefully avoid the rats' attentions for a while. And the springtails, they like to nest in undisturbed soil, and the rats will disturb it. That's part of how they kind of function. They forage around and dig around. So it means that where in a true bioactive setup, I wouldn't have to keep adding insects every now and again, and I do it maybe every 3 to 4 months, something like that. In fact, when I have my digging box, I did it every 6 months. But you do need to add them in a rat cage just because of the way things are. So I have a slightly alternative approach to this. So I have my cleanup crew. I add some to the cage, and some I will put in a small little thing, which has currently just got a block of soil ready to be soaked in there, which I'll go through later. But yeah, so I try and keep some in a little separate environment, which keeps them warm and keeps them breeding. And then I will top up my setup with a few, particularly the earthworms, every now and again. I've added mealworms before in the past to their kind of edible wood lice, that kind of thing. And it just kind of keeps adding in something that will add something to the soil and help clean the soil. Allows the rats to do a little bit of natural hunting, to be honest, though I can't say a worm's particularly fair game to a rat. They're very competent. The worms don't really stand a chance. But it also kind of does help keep things clean and in a natural way as well, without using lots and lots of kind of chemicals and such, which you do sometimes need to use, but if I can avoid it, it's not a bad thing. So that's partly how I keep the soil clean. I do the kind of digging through. So what is the soil? So that's partly why I have this block here. So I use Coco fibre soil as the bulk of my soil. These are sold in these kind of like dried bricks, compressed bricks. Sometimes you can actually get ready-made up soil, which is in kind of in big bags. That's for if you're feeling a bit lazy. It can not be too bad an idea sometimes. But I tend to buy it in the bricks because I want a lot when I'm filling up my bottom base. I think it must have taken about 8, maybe 9 blocks to fill that up, quite a large amount. This brick that I've got in here will fill this kind of little tub up, probably a bit more than I want, so I'll probably stick some into the rat's cage. But it creates kind of like quite a nice, quite fibrous soil, which I find works well in a rat kind of environment because it starts holding together quite well, and then the other stuff that ends up falling in the cage and into the soil and decomposing in there helps add to the soil structure more. So in order for a rat to properly form kind of functional tunnels that hold their shape, they do need a bit of fibre in there. So that works quite well. What I also do, because I use kind of hay as a nesting material, bits of that do end up knocked down there as well, and again get dug into the soil and help form this kind of more fibrous, strong structure. What some people think is you can't have rats that build tunnels unless you've got grass growing in there because the roots help the soils to form. But actually the act of the fibre, the kind of grass, the hay, which is just dried grass falling in there, helps form that structure. I also add some orchard bark chips. Those are sold for reptiles as well. A lot of this is sold for reptiles. A lot of the bioactive and kind of naturalistic stuff comes from the reptile world. I'm surprised actually that there isn't more people that do it for rodents. Though it is, like I say, it is a challenge with rats because keeping insects alive is fun. And also, I should mention, It's very difficult to do a true, fully bioactive setup with rats because the amount of soil I would need if I had nothing else in there. I've got 2 shelves in my cage which I have litter on, and the litter, they're quite reasonably well litter trained. I don't litter train them, I'm too lazy. But they litter train themselves, and they will use the litter trays for majority of their droppings and the majority of the urine. So not loads gets into the main soil, so that helps. But if I was to do it without those litter trays, the soil itself would get smelly quite fast, because there isn't enough volume of soil, even though there is like loads of bricks in there. And even though my cage is quite, like I could have quite a few more rats in that cage and not overpopulate it in terms of the space. The soil couldn't handle it. I would need something probably 2 or 3 times that for the number of rats in there, which is currently 6, but more normally about 8 to 10. So that's how kind of that works, and so that's why I have the litter trays. I change the litter trays probably every 2 or 3 weeks. When they get loaded, they get chucked away, replace those, and so on, but I don't change the soil. So that's quite an important thing to note. Unless you've got like an absolutely massive amount of soil, you're going to still need to use litter trays with rats, and that's because unlike your reptiles, and actually even some of the mammals that traditionally have bioactive setups, like hedgehogs, it's quite common with, it seems, they're quite dry mammals. Rats produce a hell of a lot of waste, and it's quite wet waste. Like, they pee an awful lot. We are rat owners, we know this, and that means that they do need that little bit of kind of extra place to absorb stuff away. So your soil, whilst it will absorb things away short term, because it's quite hassleful to change it, it's heavy, you have to dig a lot of it out. It's also faffy to top it back up again because you have to soak loads of blocks until the right consistency and put them back in there. You don't want to have to change it often. Plus, if it's starting to become bioactive, so like mine's got to the stage where it's coping very well and you only have to top it up occasionally with insects, I don't want to take all that out, replace it with new soil which then gets smelly or mouldy or such again. I want to keep it whilst it's working well and functioning well, as kind of creating good tunnels, it's not too dry, etc. I should say different times of year, different times of care. I've only been watering this maybe once a month at the moment in winter, and I'll put in that kind of massive volume, I'll put maybe 3 pints of water in there. All gets absorbed away. In summer, I'm having to water it every week. Similar amount of water in there. It does depend how dry the summer is. Again, different way of caring for soil. So yes, keep litter trays in there, keep using them. Try and encourage the rats to use them by making it easy for them to use. I'll do a video on litter training, on my approach to litter training, aka don't do it, just let the rats do it at some point, because I think a lot of people end up overthinking it sometimes. But yes, so get your soil in there. So I've mentioned about orchard bark. I also sometimes put coconut husk in there. Bits of hay falling into it is absolutely great. I scatter feed in it every single day, and that's quite important because that encourages the rats to dig. And actually, when I initially put it in, I sometimes have to like ruffle up the soil a little bit so some of it falls in, and that's kind of stimulates the digging. And once the rats get used to digging, then you'll find that tunnels appear and disappear and change. It's really quite nice and satisfying to watch. Some rats will love it more than others. One of my girls, I'll come down in the middle of the day and she'll be happily digging away. There won't be any food left. She just really likes digging. I've also noticed, interestingly, that my pregnant girls seem to enjoy it more than they do when they're not pregnant. I don't know if it's kind of some sort of burrowing, nesting instinct there, but it is quite nice. But yes, so that's soil. So what I'm going to do now is show you really quickly how you make it up. A lot of people, when thinking about doing this, well, for a start, they wonder where they're going to get the soil from, and that is, you can get it from most pet shops sold for reptiles, typically in the reptile section. You can get it online, so I get mine from Amazon. I just get blocks of it now because I do use it quite a lot. I use quite large amounts. And you can also get it sold as kind of compost. I think it's coconut compost fibre, cocoa fibre compost, something like that, for actually plants. So look out for it in kind of garden centres and such. So how much water to add? So I'm making this up now, which is just 1 block. I'm basically going to, and you'll have to excuse the mess when I have litters, everything becomes chaotic. So I'm just going to add enough water to kind of cover it over a bit. There's not a science to this. Well, there probably is a science to this. I'm too lazy to work it out. Apologise if the water's a little bit noisy here. Yeah, that looks about right. So for that one block, I've kind of filled it up to, it's not quite covering, but it's kind of partially submerged. That's about 3 pints for that one block. I don't know if that's the right amount or not. With a lot of this stuff, what I will do is I'll leave that overnight, which is why this video is going to be in more than one part. It's just going to soak it up. To be fair, in an hour or so, it will start kind of doing the bulk of the soaking up, and I might choose to top it up then. But quite often, I just put a block or two in a bowl, leave some water over at night, come back in the next day, poke it a bit. If it feels a bit dry, I'll add a bit more. So you want it to break down fully into mud. Sometimes it breaks into kind of like bits flake off and it's absorbed all the water and it needs more, so you just add a bit more. Sometimes it turns into mud, in which case try and drain off a bit of the extra water and then just leave it and it will evaporate out. Probably not in the rat room because it's quite cool in here at the moment. But yes, so that will kind of start working. In fact, you can see even now it's the brick has started to expand. The longer it sits in the water, the more it will expand. Eventually I'll come in and there's like loads of mud in there. Once I've done that, I'm going to move my cleanup crew into that so that they've got somewhere with a bit more space than these like really tiny little boxes that they come in, and help them establish in there. And then probably next week sometime I will add some to the giant kind of cave in there. I'll probably bury them in a little bit so it gives them a chance, particularly the earthworms. I will stick right at the bottom somewhere so they've got the best chance possible before the rats find them, and the springtails will sort themselves out. But that's where it'll go. So I'll come back to this, but in summary really so far, kind of using soils, and there's no reason in theory why you can't use a good kind of peat-free organic compost type thing. I quite like the Coco fibre one because it works really well for me. I found that things went mouldy faster in the kind of normal soil. I have used it in the past, so it didn't really work great for me, but that might have just been at the time as well. I wasn't as familiar with how to work with soil as a substrate, and I was using it in a digging box as well. And I'll be honest, my boys were lazy and didn't dig very much at the time, whereas my girls dig every day, so that helps keep it turned over. One thing you can get with this is you can get a bit of a breakout of, like, you know, the tiny little fruit flies. Now, they're not necessarily a big problem. In fact, you can actually get curly winged fruit flies as a form of cleanup crew. They help kind of dispose of stuff. They're not like carrying a lot of diseases like you'd imagine certain flies do. But it's not really desirable. It's not something you want around your house, around your area. I don't particularly love it in there. I find if the rats are digging well, and the soil is kept at the right kind of, it's difficult to describe, the right level of moisture, you don't have too many problems with it. You do need to watch what vegetables you put in there, because fruit flies tend to form around veg. So if you do feed veg, rather than just letting that go in and decompose, make sure like the next day you take anything out they haven't eaten, because that will attract the flies a lot more. And then just try and keep kind of good general hygiene around the rat room, and that tends to sort them out. I'll get it for a few days every now and again, but they soon clear out, which isn't bad at all. But yes, so those are things to think about when using soil. It is one of the best decisions I've made. Oh, I should also say you want a deep tray. So my tray on my cage, if you have a look down there, that is about 40 centimetres deep. It is by no means shallow. If you're going to go for something, let's say 20 centimetres, which feels like lots, they will probably manage to kick it out because rats are bastards. And they're very good at digging. I find that I actually don't get much kicked out at all from the kind of 40 centimetre deep stuff, which I'm quite pleased with and somewhat surprised about. I thought it would be messier than it is, even though I've got like little kick trays at the edges, which helps. But that is one thing to bear in mind as well. You want a really deep tray if you're going to be using soil, or you'll curse me probably. It'll be my fault. But yes. But if you can get it to work and work well, it's brilliant. It's just not for every situation. And that's why I wanted to cover some other substrates first, because they're quite a lot more useful for the majority of people. I don't know that I would be doing soil if it was in the house with a carpet. In fact, I can almost guarantee I wouldn't, even though the soil would hoover up an awful lot easier than a lot of the kind of substrates do, because it will get kicked out and it will get messy. And if you do get kind of a fly outbreak, even for a couple of days, it's going to be irritating while you kind of try and dig things up and sort things out. But yes, it's one of those. But the enrichment they get from it makes it well worth it for me. And it's always worth a try, see whether it suits you as well. So I think that's it from me for now. Ooh, I can show you an update on the block because it's really grown. So remember the size it was before, it's now this big. And actually has deposited some of itself at the bottom. So it's kind of like nearly halfway. I might stick an extra pint of water in before I go to bed today. And I expect it to be much better tomorrow. So tomorrow I can stick the cuke in and we'll see how things go. But yeah, so that's over from me for now. Apparently this is going to be one of my longer videos. I do apologise. I'll catch up with you later. Bye. Hi, and welcome back to the video. So it's been a couple of days now since I first gave you a bit of a waffle about what's already quite a lot of waffle actually about using earth as a substrate. So what I wanted to just show you is the kind of like basic care tips, so things that are useful. A trowel, I use this quite a lot with it. I should say that block that I soaked, started soaking, it has actually entirely filled this box, so that gives you a bit of an idea of what kind of volume you get from a single block. Now I'm going to leave some of this in to be a kind of temporary home for the rest of my cleanup crew insects, but that's far too much. It wouldn't give them any room to move, so I'm just going to chuck what's spare back into my base. And actually I'm going to do a bit of kind of just general care on my base at the moment, so I'm going to give it a dig through. I've already given it a bit of water. I'm going to give it a bit more and show you what I look for when I'm trying to decide whether to water it or not. Right, a little bit more that should do. Right, when you're looking to try and decide when you need to water your soil, you're looking for it to be able to kind of clump together and hold together. So a good example, if I bring kind of this up at the moment, this is a little bit dry. So if you notice when I'm kind of picking it up and clumping it, it's just kind of turning into quite fine dry stuff. Now I want it to clump a lot more. So a good example of this is if I look into this soil here, and I have watered this bit recently, is this. So I can pull out a hand and it kind of falls down as a clump, and that means it's kind of holding, and you can actually see, if I bring this a bit closer, the amount of fibre and such that is in my soil now, bearing in mind that this has been going for I think about 4 months plus at the moment, so it's a lot more of kind of a living soil than just what I would get out of the cocoa block. And that's one thing to bear in mind. Don't expect it to be perfect straight away. Keep on kind of working with it, turning it over, etc. So if I move that box out of the way, we'll come to that later. And now I'm going to kind of just do general kind of maintenance. What I'll do is, and I don't dig through it all the time because like I say, the girls mostly do it themselves, but I've also got kind of new soil in here today as well, so I'm just kind of going to give it a good turnover. I am now unfortunately destroying all their tunnels, but that will give them a new challenge to create some more. There is kind of all sorts of stuff under here actually. I should mention that one of the bonuses of the soil, if I kind of like dig here a little bit, there is, I don't know if you can actually see it, just here, an actual planter, so I can get my hand right in here, and they quite like making tunnels into that. So it's actually a brown planter, so you can't really see it very well. It's just kind of like a hanging basket thing with lots of little holes in it. It's plastic, so it copes quite well and lasts in the soil. I do have some kind of wooden stuff in here and some kind of more woven stuff. That does tend to kind of eventually fall apart. I should say I sometimes dig with the kind of spade, sometimes I just use my hands because it's a bit easier to get around all the different corners. I do remember burying something under here at some point. Yes, there is still some wood under there, like a little wooden archway. But yes, basically all I'm doing here is turning things over a little bit. I found a piece of rope. It's natural rope actually, so that doesn't matter, that will just kind of degrade down with the rest. Yes, a spade's fine to a point, but it is a bit easier to get in there with just your hands sometimes. Right, so that's fairly good. Most of it's all been loosened up. Ooh, just found a big hole there. Dig that flap back down again. Yeah, so all the nice little hillocks and valleys that they created in tunnels are sadly no more, but it also means that it's back to being kind of like a blank slate for them to build their new tunnels and such. So it now comes to the bugs. So what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to start off by putting the earthworms in. I'm going to dig a few holes for them, give them a start so they kind of can get well under before the rats start digging for them. Like I say, I'm not going to put them all in there. I've gone for small earthworms. You could go for bigger ones, but then they're easier game. The small ones will, in theory, grow to be big ones. Let's be very gentle here, because we don't want to damage them. The worms seem to cope very well when you dig in the garden. So here we have some earthworms in there, of varying liveliness. They've been stuck in quite a small amount of soil for a while, so they're probably a little bit bored. So I'm just going to scatter a few into various holes I've got and then bury them. And they will very much sort themselves out in there. The rest are going to go in my other box to kind of settle in and survive whilst the rats are hunting the rest. The rats are shouting at each other at the moment. Right, springtails. So there's a thing with springtails. These go on the surface, so these are generally surface dwellers. I'm going to put, again, probably about half in there. I'm putting them in with a little bit of their soil. And we'll see how they go. So they're in there. You won't be able to see them in there, but there's not a lot, but just sprinkled over the soil. And again, I'm saving some of them and some of their soil, which I'll put straight into the box with them. So that's them all settled. I won't do very much more there. The soil was kind of damp enough in here that it doesn't really need much water. I might do a bit there actually. Bit of fleece that can go out, that won't really settle. So watering, all I do, pint of water. I've already put 2 pints in here so far today, so I'll try and avoid where I've put the springtails and the earthworms, but just needs a little bit more. And it kind of, I just sprinkle it around a bit. It will go in patches. I don't sprinkle it too near the front because that's not especially watertight along the front, but around the edges it's not bad. It'll kind of absorb through the soil, and the rats again will help turn it over by digging it through. So that's them settled. Hopefully they will settle into their new home. You notice I'm doing this without the rats in here. It's horrific when you're trying to mess around with kind of earthworms and bugs and such when the rats are around, because they're kind of all into it and want to have a good go before they get settled. In an ideal world, I would add insects just before I did an intro or something, so that the rats were actually out of the cage for a week or two. Ideal world, or over when you're on holiday or something. It gives them a really good chance to settle in, but I don't have one of those coming up for a little while, and I wanted to kind of get this video done because there's quite a lot of interest in it. So they will still settle, but they won't settle as quickly as if they were kind of left alone for a period of time. So for these two, right, all I'm going to do is pop them straight into the kind of soil. I'm less worried about this because the earthworms will dig their way in. I'll turn it a little bit. So I don't have to dig them in quite as much. I'm going to add a little bit of water to this, I think. It's just a bit too dry. So I've got them in there. They're near the surface, but I only bury them when the rats are around because the rats will dig them up very quickly otherwise. In here they've got time to get themselves settled in there. I'll add a bit of water around the edges just because they need watering. The other thing I will add is a little bit of vitelline or flaked grain. So vitelline's a kind of, it's a soakable dog mash that I actually use for kittens quite often. Basically, it's a mixture of different flaked grains. So you can use any kind of flaked grains. In theory, you can use breakfast cereals too. You're not adding very much, just a few grains over the surface. It's particularly good for mealworms. Mealworms seem to love the stuff. It just gives them a little bit of food to start eating, and you would expect it to get mouldy. You don't want to get really mouldy, but the odd bits, because part of what these insects do is eat mould, so that's quite useful. So they need a little bit of mould around there to eat. Bits of fresh vegetables are also good. They make a good water source. And then I'll just keep an eye on them every 2 or 3 days. I'll keep them in here. I'll keep them near the radiator this time of year because it's quite cold in here. And the radiator's set to 16, but the actual temperature is more like about 13. It'll get down to lower overnight. But if I keep them near there, then they need warmth in the way the rats can all go and all cuddle up in the hammock together. The insects don't quite do so well. But that's one thing to bear in mind, especially mealworms, they like it quite warm. If you're in a house, you don't have to worry about that, just keep them as you would like normally. But if you're in a kind of rat room like this that isn't heated, just bear in mind that they do need it a little bit warm, they do need it moist. If it gets dry, and the same goes in the main cage, that will kill them off, so don't let it get too dry. You're looking for that clumping, and you don't want it to get into kind of dry, kind of almost sand-like soil. That's just not going to give them the kind of moisture they need to live in. So that's the main things on me. In theory, they will breed in here. I actually got to that stage with mealworms where I was getting darkling beetles and they were laying eggs and so on, and then I put them all in the cage eventually because I kind of run down my numbers. I'll probably get mealworms again and do that again because it was quite fun, but the rats do catch mealworms really easily. The beetles are a little bit more challenging for them, but still it's kind of a bit too fair game. Oh, I should add, this tub that I'm keeping them in is just like a normal plastic tub. Only thing I have done is, you notice there's kind of like mesh on the top. Now that is actually too broad for like mealworms and such. They can easily get through it, and more importantly so can flies, and you don't want flies getting into your mealworms. So I've actually taped over fly screen actually over all the mesh holes, so they still get ventilation, which is important, but you can't get flies and such in there, so that protects them too. So that's the main thing with soil. Kind of in basic summary, it isn't like any other substrate. It's long lasting, so it'll last for months on end as long as you care for it well. Instead of keeping it dry, you're looking at keeping it kind of moist, not soggy or wet, but kind of moist and clumping. Using cocoa fibre blocks as a base is a great way to start, or ready-made cocoa fibre soil, but make sure you're kind of adding in other textures as well. Give it time to form, so adding hay as nesting material is great. Bits of bark, etc. in there is also great. It'll all kind of mulch down. The important thing is keep it turning over. So scatter feed your rats food in there to help them, encourage them to dig. Use a spade to turn it over at least once a week, or your hands. Make sure you keep it watered. It really does depend on how dry it is and how much soil you've got in there. Bear in mind it's messy. The rats will kind of dig stuff out unless you've got a really deep tray, and I will say a deep tray is a must if you're using soil. You really don't want to use it when you're not using it, or you can use it in a digging box. Like I used to have a digging box that was kind of the full width of this shelf and went all the way back and was about kind of similar depth to this, about 40 centimetres, and that's a good way to see whether it works for you first. And with a digging box you can put a lid on it so they don't kick out as much. Though actually mine don't dig out much of here, and they have marvellous tunnels in there, so I think the kind of larger volume changes things a little bit to the digging box, where they tend to dig up in a kind of diagonal to try and get decent tunnels. They don't need to here because they've got a full length and quite a lot of space to do their tunnels. But yes, brilliant substrate, just not for everybody, and I think that's important. I really enjoy it, and the girls really enjoy it, and I'm glad I'm doing it, but I don't think it's something that everybody will get on well with, because it's kind of different, and because you don't change it. It's not practical to change it. In fact, if I changed this, it would take a few weeks for it to get up to this kind of quality at least again. And adding insects, a lot of people will be put off by that idea. I don't think you have to do it, but it's something that I do regularly, and I do think it helps it and helps keep it kind of low smell. And of course I do it with litter trays, so my rats do go to the toilet in both litter trays religiously. I'll get the odd dropping kits down to here. In fact, I also get the odd bit of litter ending up in the soil, but that'll decompose down because it's kind of paper-based cat litter I'm using in here. There will be the odd dropping in there, but that's enough for the insects to keep on top of, and the kind of soil to break down and kind of probably enriches it. I do get the odd bit of food sprouting in there, fairly rare because my rats are quite hungry, because apparently I starve them even though at least one of them's fat right now. And that's fine, because sprouted is actually usually slightly better for them. It unlocks more of the nutrients. I could try and grow grass seed and such in here, but they would eat it very quickly, so I don't. But if I had a tray, I could grow it outside and then transplant it into here. Or if I was away for a couple of weeks, I might want to grow some seeds in there specifically for them to hunt for. Great, very natural surface. There's no smell, so 4 months, no cleaning out. I can't smell anything. The only time I can smell stuff from the cage is when the litter trays need cleaning out, so I clean them out, don't bother with the base, and it's fine. If you're smelling a lot of smell from your substrate, then something's not working in the overall setup, and it's one to think about. whether it be that the rats aren't using litter trays, and honestly I don't train mine so they choose to, but part of that is also I set up the cage so that it's easy for them to choose to. But yes, part of that might be people are not putting the insects in, or the insects aren't having a chance to kind of do their work. Some people don't use insects and have no problems, but then that's also fine. It really does depend on the rats and such, but it's worth giving a try. And I would recommend, if you're not sure, start out with a digging box. Try and make it decently big, and make sure you are staying on top of it by digging through it and such as well, and just see how you get on. I can't see me going back to a normal substrate for this cage. I'm umming and ahhing about what I can do up there. Part of the reason it isn't already up in my top cage is because of the weight. So what we're talking about here is something that is quite damp and therefore is quite heavy. So this sits basically on the floor. If I was doing something that was like, even if the spray makes it easier, even if my kind of full floor was in there, I would have to be quite careful. I've got quite a mass of soil in here. It's very heavy, which is why I sit it on the floor. If I was doing it in the top cage, I could not do this level of depth because it's putting a lot of weight very high up, and that could kind of cause the cage to fall or cause accidents, or even put strain on the frame and cause it to twist. So you do need to think about things in relation to kind of how strong a floor you're on. So this is like massive volume. A small kind of digging box isn't too bad because that's fairly light, but feel how light it is. When I had the digging box here, physically when it was full and damp, it was almost too heavy for me to lift out myself, and that kind of gives you a kind of feel for how heavy these things are. I had extra legs under this shelf going down to the floor to support it, because even though it's a fairly sturdy shelf, it's not really moving much. I didn't want to trust that much weight to kind of what a thin metal supports. So bear that in mind. That's the other reason why you don't end up wanting to clean this out often, which is convenient, because physically it's quite hard work to do. But I feel that I've probably talked long enough on kind of bioactive-ish setups and soil as a substrate. I hope some more people try it. I know a few people are trying it now and enjoying it too. But don't feel pressured to try it unless you want a bit of an adventure. And if it doesn't work for you, then there are many other very good substrates out there. This just happens to be my favourite. So over and out from Isami Rats for now.